The thing about galactic civilization, Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen discovered, was that it perfected the art of making simple problems infinitely complicated. Take, for instance, the basic human need to eat food that wouldn't kill you. On Earth, this required walking to the store. On Nexus Station Gamma 7, this required Form 2847B, Dietary Accommodation Request. Form 2847C, Species-Specific Nutritional Analysis, and a notarized statement from 3 different medical professionals confirming that, yes, capsaicin would not cause her to explode. She was currently on Form 2847D, which asked her to provide a detailed molecular breakdown of every spice in her grandmother's dumpling recipe, because apparently, somewhere in the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Galactic Trade Consortium, there existed a committee dedicated to ensuring that human comfort food posed no existential threat to the universe. Question 47, she muttered, tapping her stylus against the holographic display. List all potential allergens present in your requested food items, including but not limited to proteins, carbohydrates, trace minerals, emotional attachments, and cultural significance. The Zephyrian clerk behind the reinforced polymer barrier looked up from his own stack of forms. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Chen had learned meant either confusion or the alien equivalent of a migraine, given that she'd been sitting in his office for 3 hours. She suspected the latter. Is there a problem with question 47, Human Chun? His translator rendered his voice in the carefully neutral tone reserved for customer service representatives across the galaxy. Well, Clerk Zachdh, I'm having trouble quantifying the exact allergen potential of memories of my grandmother's kitchen on Sunday mornings. Should I list that under trace minerals or cultural significance? Zachdh's secondary arms fluttered. Definitely migraine territory. Perhaps you could simply request standard nutritional paste? Form 12A is much shorter. I've been eating your standard nutritional paste for 6 months. I'm pretty sure it's what depression tastes like if depression were beige. Beige is a very soothing color, offered Zachdh helpfully. Before Chung could explain that food shouldn't be soothing so much as edible, the station's alert system chose that moment to demonstrate the universe's impeccable timing. A low, thrumming alarm filled the air, followed by an announcement in 17 different languages. Chen caught the Galactic Standard version. All personnel proceed to designated safety areas. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Zachdh's eyes went wide, all 4 of them, in perfect synchronization. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. He began frantically shuffling through his forms. I need Form 88 Alpha for emergency procedures. No, wait, that's for asteroid impacts. Form 88 Beta? No, that's solar flares. His voice climbed an octave. Where's Form 88 Gamma for hostile contact protocols? Through the transparent aluminum windows, Chen could see small craft emerging from what had appeared to be empty space. Their hulls bore the scorched metal aesthetic favored by raiders throughout the sector, functional, intimidating, and completely uninterested in filing proper approach documentation. Found it. Zachdh waved a holographic form triumphantly. Now, if you could please initial here, here, and here, acknowledging that you understand emergency evacuation procedures and waive all liability claims against the station in case of death, dismemberment, or existential dissolution. Zachdh. Chen's voice carried the particular patience of someone who had spent a career dealing with military bureaucracy. Those ships are charging weapons. Yes, but protocol clearly states that all forms must be completed before. The first plasma blast struck the station's outer ring. The deck shuddered, and every holographic display in the office flickered like dying fireflies. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in the kind of red glow that universally meant, today is not going according to plan. Chun stood up, her chair clattering backward. Right, change plans. But the forms, will be very difficult to file if we're all dead. She moved to the office's maintenance panel and began pulling out components with the confident efficiency of someone who had learned to fix things under less than ideal circumstances. Tell me, Zach TH, what's the station's primary defensive capability? Well, we have very stern warnings in 12 languages, and our insurance policy covers up to 15 million credits in structural damage. Another impact shook the station. This time, the lights stayed off a bit longer before the backups engaged. Weapons. Zach TH, I'm asking about weapons. Oh. His translator somehow managed to convey surprise embarrassment. We don't have weapons. This is a civilian trade station. The Galactic Peace Accords of 2387 specifically prohibit. Chen looked at him over the tangle of fiber optic cables. She was now rewiring. Let me guess. There's a form for that too. Form 1243, J actually. Very comprehensive. She shook her head and returned to her work. The maintenance panel wasn't designed for what she was doing. But then again, neither was she. Officially, she was a technical infrastructure consultant, a job title that sounded impressively vague and meant she fixed things that broke in creative ways. Unofficially, she was what happened when you took someone with a background in military engineering and asked them to pretend they'd never learned how to make things explode efficiently. What are you doing? Zach TH had stopped shuffling forms and was watching her with the fascination of someone observing a natural disaster in progress, violating approximately 47 safety regulations and probably 3 interstellar treaties. She connected 2 cables that were definitely not meant to be connected. The good news is that your insurance policy might actually come in handy. The improvised device she was building wouldn't win any engineering awards, but would turn the station's internal lighting system into something resembling a defensive grid. The raiders were expecting a helpless civilian target. They weren't expecting someone to jury-rig the fire suppression system into a plasma dispersal network. Of course, there was roughly a 30% chance her modifications would overload the station's power grid and kill everyone aboard. But given that the raiders had roughly a 90% chance of killing everyone aboard, Chen liked those odds. Human Chun. Zach Dave said carefully, I don't think you're supposed to do that. Probably not. She made a final connection and stepped back. But I'm not cleared for combat operations, so technically, this isn't combat. This is aggressive maintenance. Outside the window, the raider craft moved into attack formation. Their plasma cannons glowed with the kind of light that suggested professional interest in structural demolition. Chen smiled grimly and activated her improvised defense system. Let's see how they handle customer service. 3 decks above Chen's ongoing violation of galactic safety standards, Station Commander Velktar was experiencing what a species called crisis molt, the involuntary shedding that occurred when a Croaxian encountered situations their evolutionary biology hadn't prepared them for. In this case, watching a human turn their lighting grid into a weapon system while filing noise complaints about the explosions. Sir, his communications officer announced, her voice carrying particular strain that came from translating human profanity in real time. The technical infrastructure consultant has just redirected 17% of our power grid through the decorative fountain system. The fountain system. Velktar felt another patch of scales detach. May I ask why? According to her transmitted schematics, she's using the water circulation pumps to create a pressurized coolant loop for what she calls rapid-fire brightness adjustments. Through the command center's main view screen, they watched Chen's modifications take effect. The station's exterior lights began strobing in patterns that seemed random until you realized they were targeting the raiders' visual sensors with mathematical precision. 2 of the attacking craft veered off course, their pilots temporarily blinded by synchronized light bursts calibrated to exploit the known weaknesses of hegemony neural implants. Brilliant, whispered Lieutenant Crix VA, the station's Valdorian security chief. Completely illegal, utterly unauthorized, and tactically brilliant. Document everything. Velktar ordered, if we survive this, there will be inquiries. Many, many inquiries. The recording systems captured Chen's next innovation with clinical detachment. Having successfully weaponized their lighting, she had moved on to repurposing the atmospheric recycling system. The raiders found themselves flying through clouds of maintenance nanobots that had been reprogrammed to treat their hull plating as particularly stubborn dust. Commander, the communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from Human Chun. She says, and I quote, having some issues with the HVAC system. Might want to crack a window. Velktar was still processing this when the first raider vessel began listing to starboard, its hull integrity compromised by microscopic machines that had decided its armor plating was interfering with proper air circulation. She turned our janitor bots into hull-breaching equipment. Crix VA observed what sounded suspiciously like admiration. Is that even possible? According to 17 different physics models, no. According to Human Chun, apparently yes. The raiders, to their credit, adapted quickly. They switched to wide dispersal plasma bombardment, targeting the station's power grid directly rather than trying to penetrate its defenses, which would have been an excellent strategy had they not been dealing with someone who treated power distribution failures as personal challenges. Chen's voice crackled over the internal communication system. Control, this is maintenance. I'm showing some power fluctuations in sectors 7 through 12. Gonna need to bypass the main grid and run everything through the coffee machines. The coffee machines? Velktar's molt accelerated. They run on independent fusion cells. Very reliable. Also, fair warning, the espresso might taste a little different for the next few days. The tactical displays showed their power systems reorganizing themselves in configurations that violated several fundamental principles of electrical engineering. Chun was running life support through the food dispensers, routing communications through the waste management system, and somehow using the gymnasium's exercise equipment to maintain artificial gravity. Sir, the communications officer announced, sounding increasingly strained, I'm receiving priority transmissions from Galactic Trade Consortium, the Croaxian Military Authority, and the Human Colonial Administration. They're demanding explanations for what they're calling aggressive infrastructure modification in violation of Treaty 77 Alpha. What should I tell them? Velktar watched another raider ship lose navigation control as Chen hijacked its targeting computers through an ingenious exploitation of their universal translation protocols. Tell them we're filing Form 88 Gamma in triplicate and request they hold all questions until after we're done not being murdered. The lead raider vessel, apparently tired of being confounded by maintenance equipment, launched what appeared to be a boarding torpedo. Shin responded by turning the station's docking clamps into an impromptu railgun, launching the torpedo back at its point of origin with compound interest. Commander, Crix VA reported, sensors show the remaining raiders are preparing to retreat. Already? But they've barely begun their attack. I think they've realized they're not fighting a trade station anymore. They're fighting whatever happens when you give a human engineer a problem and tell her she's not allowed to solve it. Through the command center speakers, they could hear Chun humming something that the translators helpfully identified as an ancient human work song traditionally associated with destruction of obstacles. She was currently rewiring the gift shop's holographic displays to broadcast surrender demands in 17 languages, including 3 that the raiders' own computers didn't recognize. Sir, the communications officer said, Human Chun is requesting permission to... I'm sorry, she's requesting permission to clean up this mess before it gets out of hand. Velktar looked at the tactical display. where the station's various systems were now operating in configurations that would require 6 different engineering degrees to understand. What exactly does she mean by cleanup? The answer came in the form of a coordinated systems pulse that temporarily disabled every electronic device within a 3-kilometer radius. The raiders found themselves drifting helplessly in the void, their ships reduced to expensive paperweights by maintenance protocols that had been elevated to the level of strategic weapons. As the last raider vessel powered down, Chen's voice echoed to the command center one final time. "Control, this is maintenance. Problem resolved. Also, you're going to want to have someone look at the plumbing in Section 4. I may have accidentally turned it into a particle accelerator." Velktar stared at the readings that showed their humble trade station had somehow acquired the defensive capabilities of a military installation. "Lieutenant, what's our current legal status?" Crick's VA consulted her databases. "According to Galactic law, we just committed approximately 47 acts of aggression, violated 16 peace treaties, and somehow declared war on 3 different stellar governments. And according to practical reality, we're alive, the raiders are neutralized, and human Chen just proved that bureaucracy stops working the moment someone decides to ignore it." Velktar felt his scales settle back into their proper configuration. "Begin documenting everything. And someone get me the forms for requesting political asylum. I suspect we're going to need them." The emergency session of the Tri-Sector Diplomatic Corps convened exactly 47 minutes after the last raider ship went dark, which was either impressively efficient or suspiciously convenient, depending on your perspective. Ambassador Thexnil of the Hegemony Collective had called the meeting, ostensibly to address unprovoked acts of military aggression by Terran operatives, though everyone in the holographic conference chamber knew the real reason. Someone had just made his carefully orchestrated raid look like amateur hour. "Honored colleagues," Thexnil began, his cybernetic implants gleaming as they processed real-time legal databases. "We have witnessed a flagrant violation of the Daenerys Accords. A single human operative has demonstrated military capabilities that threaten the balance of power in this entire sector." Ambassador Yilseth of the Altarian Republic leaned back in her crystalline chair, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with what passed for amusement among her species. "Are we seriously convening an emergency session because a maintenance worker defended herself? My teenage offspring show more aggressive behavior during feeding time." This was not self-defense. Thexnil snapped. This was a calculated demonstration of human military technology. Technology that was supposed to be contained under treaty restrictions. Contained. The new voice belonged to Ambassador Park of the Human Colonial Administration, joining the conference from Earth with the kind of timing that suggested she'd been expecting this call. "Thexnil, are you suggesting we should have let your raiders destroy a civilian station?" The silence that followed was a diplomatic equivalent of stepping on a landmine. Thexnil cybernetics word as they processed the implications of Park's casual revelation. "My raiders," he said carefully. "I'm afraid I don't understand the accusation." "Oh, please." Park's smile was the kind that preceded very bad news for everyone else involved. The attack vessels were registered to shell companies traced back to hegemony military contractors. The targeting patterns matched standard collective harassment protocols. And the timing, immediately after Lieutenant Commander Chen's transfer approval was mysteriously delayed for 14 consecutive months, was delightfully coincidental. Chun, who had been listening to this exchange through an unauthorized tap into the diplomatic channels, paused in her restoration of the coffee machine power grid. Lieutenant Commander. That was a rank she hadn't used in official capacity for over a year, not since her reassignment to civilian technical consulting. The fact that Park was using it now meant the diplomatic gloves were coming off. Furthermore, Park continued, the raiders used obsolete hegemony encryption protocols that were specifically designed to be broken by our intelligence services. almost as if someone wanted us to know who was responsible. Yilsetha's pattern shifted to deep blue, curiosity mixed with anticipation. Are you suggesting this was a deliberate provocation? I'm suggesting that certain parties have been testing human defensive capabilities by targeting our civilian personnel in increasingly creative ways. What they discovered today is that we don't actually have civilian personnel. We have people who are very good at pretending to be civilians until someone tries to kill them. Down in what had formerly been the gift shop and was now Chen's impromptu command center, she found herself sharing space with a wounded Valdoran from the station's environmental department. The being, Kestau, according to his identification badge, had been caught in the initial attack and was now serving as an impromptu audience for Chen's unauthorized modifications. You're not really a maintenance consultant, are you? Kestau asked, watching Chen recalibrate sensors that were definitely not designed to track diplomatic communications. That depends on how you define maintenance, Chen replied, not looking up from her work. I maintain peace, stability, and the operational integrity of human assets in contested space. The fact that this occasionally involves repurposing decorative fountains into weapons platforms is purely coincidental. The hegemony wanted you classified as non-combat personnel. The hegemony wanted a lot of things. They wanted humans restricted to technical support roles. They wanted our military capabilities documented and regulated. They wanted us predictable. She finished her calibrations and looked at Kestau directly. The problem with getting what you want is that sometimes you get exactly what you ask for. Back in the diplomatic conference, Thexnil was discovering the truth of that observation. Even if your accusations were accurate, which they are not, the response was disproportionate. A single human destroyed 6 military-grade attack vessels using civilian infrastructure. No, Park corrected. A single human defended herself using the materials at hand. The fact that those materials happen to include a space station with creative modification potential is hardly our fault. We didn't build Nexus Station Gamma 7. But you certainly seem to know how to weaponize it. We know how to weaponize everything, Thexnil. That's what makes us human. The question is why you thought that was a weakness instead of a strength. Ambassador Silwarthak of the Mantari Consensus had been silent through most of the exchange, but now his mechanical voice cut through the tension. The legal implications are complex. If the human was acting as a civilian, her actions constitute vigilante justice. If she was acting as military personnel, then the human colonial administration has been violating treaty obligations for months. There's a third option, Park said quietly. The conference chamber fell silent. In diplomatic circles, third options were usually the kind that redefined the entire conversation. She was acting as exactly what she was classified as, a technical consultant. The fact that her consultation included creative interpretations of defensive engineering is simply a consequence of human educational standards. We don't actually separate military and civilian engineering disciplines the way other species do. Chun grinned as she listened to Park systematically dismantle a year's worth of careful diplomatic maneuvering. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any of them realized. She hadn't been hidden on the station to avoid detection. She'd been hidden in plain sight. Her real capabilities obscured by bureaucratic classifications that nobody had bothered to examine too closely. In fact, Park continued, I have authorization to declassify Lieutenant Commander Chen's actual assignment. She wasn't maintaining trade station infrastructure. She was field testing human adaptive engineering protocols in multi-species environments. The Raider attack was simply an unscheduled performance evaluation. Thexnil's cybernetics sparked visibly. You're saying this was all a setup? I'm saying that if you attack our people, you shouldn't be surprised when they defend themselves effectively. The method of defense is determined by available resources and operational parameters. Today, Those parameters included a space station with very flexible infrastructure. Kestow looked at Chun with something approaching awe. You turned our entire station into a weapon. I turned your entire station into what always was, Chin corrected. A collection of systems that could be configured for different purposes. The Raiders just happened to provide the motivation for some creative reconfiguration. The diplomatic conference was degenerating into the kind of argument that would normally require mediation by the Galactic Council. But Ambassador Park had one more revelation to deploy. Oh, and Thexnil? The performance evaluation results are being transmitted to every human colony and military installation in this sector, along with a complete technical analysis of how Lieutenant Commander Chun achieved the results using only civilian-grade infrastructure. The implications hit the conference like a cascading systems failure. If one human could turn a trade station into a defensive installation, what could 1,000 humans do with actual military resources? You're threatening us, Thexnil said finally. No, Park replied with deadly calm. We're educating you. The difference is that threats imply future consequences. Education provides immediate understanding. Chin shut down her unauthorized diplomatic tap and returned her attention to the coffee machine. Tomorrow, there will be investigations, hearings, and probably a great deal more paperwork. But tonight, she had successfully defended a civilian station, exposed a conspiracy, and demonstrated that human engineering was limited only by imagination and available materials. She made a mental note to request hazard pay for creative problem solving. After all, there had to be a form for that. 6 weeks later, Chin found herself back where this whole mess had started, sitting across from Clerk Zaktich, filling out forms. The difference was at this time, she was wearing her actual uniform, complete with ribbons indicating commendations for innovative resource utilization and excellence in diplomatic engineering, and Zaktich was treating her with the careful respect typically reserved for unstable explosives. Form 94 Delta, Zaktich announced, sliding the holographic document across his reinforced desk. Official testimony regarding unauthorized modification of civilian infrastructure during hostile engagement. Chin glanced at the first question. Did you at any time knowingly violate galactic safety protocols while defending Nexus Station Gamma 7? She checked the yes box with cheerful efficiency. Question 2. Did you receive proper authorization before implementing defensive modifications? Another yes. This one accompanied by a data packet containing her newly declassified mission parameters. Zaktich's 4 eyes blinked in careful sequence. I'm confused. How could both answers be yes? Because I had authorization to do whatever was necessary to complete my mission. The mission included testing adaptive engineering under stress conditions. The Raiders provided the stress. Everything else was just engineering. The real beauty of the situation, Chin reflected, was how the bureaucracy had trapped itself. The hegemony had insisted on classifying her as non-combat personnel to limit human military presence. The Trade Consortium had required extensive documentation of her capabilities to ensure station safety. The Human Colonial Administration had provided mission authorization broad enough to encompass any reasonable interpretation of technical consulting. Put it all together, and you got someone who was simultaneously a civilian contractor, a military operative, and a diplomatic asset, depending on which set of forms you were reading at any given moment. Form 94 Echo, Zaktich continued, producing another document, damage assessment and restitution claims. This was where things got interesting. The Raiders had caused approximately 3 million credits in structural damage. Chen's defensive modifications had caused approximately 12 million credits in unscheduled infrastructure enhancement, but her actions had also prevented the complete destruction of the station, which would have cost approximately 200 million credits to replace. So, Chen mused, scanning the financial breakdown. By causing $12 million in damage to prevent $200 million in losses, I've generated a net benefit of 188 million credits. Subtract the 3 million the raiders caused, and the station actually came out ahead. That's not how insurance claims work. Zach TH said weakly. It's how math works. And since the consortium insists on mathematical precision in all financial documentation, she pulled up another form. I'm filing a bill for services rendered. Consulting fee for creative problem solving under adverse conditions. The number at the bottom of her invoice made Zach TH's translator emit a sound like a dying quantum processor. You can't charge the station for defending it. I'm not charging for defending it. I'm charging for the technical consultation that happened to include defense as a secondary benefit. The primary service was demonstrating the adaptive potential of standard infrastructure when operated outside normal parameters. This was the moment Chun had been building toward since the first plasma blast had interrupted her dumpling paperwork. The hegemony had wanted to limit human capabilities through bureaucratic classification. The trade consortium had wanted humans confined to support roles. Various other species had assumed that by controlling the paperwork, they could control the people doing the work. What none of them had understood was that humans were very good at bureaucracy when they put their minds to it. They just typically preferred to solve problems directly rather than filing forms about them. But when the forms became the problem, humans could certainly solve that too. Zach H. Chin said gently, "You've been processing my food request forms for 6 months. In that time, I've submitted 4,237 pages of documentation to prove that dumplings won't destroy the universe. Would you like to know what I learned during that process?" The Zephyrian's silence was answer enough. I learned that the bureaucracy isn't designed to prevent problems. It's designed to ensure that when problems occur, there's always someone else to blame. The forms don't protect anyone. They just create a paper trail showing who was responsible for following procedures while everything went to hell. She pulled up one final document on her personal tablet. "So I prepared something special for you. My final form." The title read, Form 0, Authorization to ignore all other forms when they interfere with mission completion. "This isn't a real form," Zach TH protested. "It is now. I've filed it with 17 different bureaucratic offices, cross-referenced it with 43 existing legal precedents, and had it authenticated by the Galactic Notary Service. As of this morning, it's officially part of the administrative code." The implications dawn on Zach TH slowly. You've just given yourself permission to ignore any regulation that interferes with your work. Not just me, any human technical consultant operating in contested space. We called the Chun Protocol. She stood up, straightening her uniform. The beauty is that it uses the bureaucracy's own rules to exempt us from bureaucratic oversight. Very elegant, really. Through the office windows, Chin could see new construction beginning on the station's exterior. Her modifications had been so effective that the trade consortium was incorporating them into standard defensive protocols. Other stations were requesting their own technical consultants with similar creative problem-solving capabilities. The hegemony's attempt to limit human military effectiveness had backfired spectacularly. Instead of one restricted operative, they now faced the prospect of hundreds of humans throughout the sector, all officially classified as civilian contractors, all armed with broad mission parameters and the bureaucratic authority to ignore any rules that got in their way. "One last thing," Chin said, pausing at the door. "My food request forms? I'm withdrawing them." But we were so close to approval. Just 17 more signatures and a geological survey of the dumpling ingredients. Chin smiled. "I've decided to open a restaurant instead. Nothing like a good crisis to demonstrate market demand for actual food." She handed him a final document. "Here's my business license application. I'm calling it Combat Kitchen, where every meal is a mission. Zach TH stared at the form. After everything that had happened, she was still filing paperwork. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. Will you be serving those dumplings? He asked hopefully. First item on the menu. Chun confirmed. No forms required. Cash only. As she walked away, Chun reflected on the elegant irony of her situation. They had tried to contain her with bureaucracy, so she had mastered their bureaucracy and used it to free herself. They had classified her as non-combat personnel, so she had redefined what non-combat meant. They had wanted predictability, so she had given them exactly what they asked for, just not in the way they expected. The war hadn't waited for her paperwork to be processed. But then again, the war had never really been about the paperwork in the first place. It had been about people and resources, and the stubborn human refusal to accept that problems couldn't be solved just because solving them wasn't officially authorized. Some battles were won with weapons. Others were won with wrenches and wire, and a complete disregard for manufacturer specifications. And sometimes, Chin thought as she headed off to terrorize another office full of forms, you won by proving that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't a weapon at all. It was a human with a clipboard and time to kill.